This will be the last video number 11 of the aggregate demand and aggregate supply series, which is part of Unit 2.2 of the IB Macroeconomics syllabus. In this video, I'm going to explain the Keynesian or the Keynesian Multiplier. So let's see what this topic is all about. Learning outcomes, I'm going to explain with reference to the concepts of leakages or withdrawals and injections, the nature and the importance of the Keynesian multiplier. I'm going to calculate the multiplier using either of the following formulas, so 1 over 1 minus MPC, or 1 divided by MPS plus MRT plus MPM. I'm going to use the multiplier to calculate the effect on GDP of a change in an injection, maybe investment or government spending or exports. And I'm going to draw a Keynesian ADAS diagram to show the impact of the multiplier. So let's get started. If you remember back when we introduced the circular flow of income model, there are leakages that leak out of the circular flow of income in any economy. Examples of these leakages, there are three. Savings, they leak out, taxes, and import expenditure. But there are also injections that are injected into the circular flow, like investment spending, government spending by the government sector, and export revenue by the foreign sector. So the question is, by how much will a change in an injection, one of those three injections, investment, government spending, or export revenue, how much will a change in an injection affect aggregate demand or GDP? We use the Keynesian multiplier to calculate the net or the final effect on AD or GDP of an increase in an injection like government spending or export revenue or investment spending. Usually when an injection is made into the economy, you'd expect aggregate demand to just increase by the amount of the injection, but that's not the case. The net or the final effect on aggregate demand or GDP is actually much bigger because this injection that is injected into the circular flow multiplies, and that's the whole concept of the Keynesian multiplier. So, to understand the multiplier, we must first understand the leakages. There are three leakages. We know there's savings, there's import spending, and there's taxes. So, with savings, we look at the marginal propensity to save, MPS, which is the change in saving as a result of a change in income. Okay? The marginal propensity to save is the proportion of an increase in income that will be saved, the percentage of that increase in the injection that will be saved, and therefore it will leak out of the circular flow. The MPM is the marginal propensity to import. It is the proportion or the percentage of an increase in income that will be spent on imports, therefore leaked out of the circular flow. It's the change in import spending as a result of a change in income. And the last one is the marginal rate of taxation, the MRT, which is the change in taxes as a result of a change in income. It is the proportion of an increase in income that will be taxed and therefore leaked out of the circular flow. Now, those three together, when you add them up, the sum of all three will equal the economy's marginal propensity to withdraw, the MPW. What is the significance of those three marginal propensities, or the marginal rate of taxation? Let's find out in the next slide. So this brings us to the MPC, the change in consumption spending as a result of a change in income. The MPC will be equal to 1 minus the total sum of all three marginal propensities. So it will be equal to 1 minus the MPS plus the MPM plus the MRT, or you can simplify it and say that it will be equal to 1 minus the MPW, marginal propensity to withdraw. This is the MPC. So after you take away the percentage that will be saved, the percentage that will be spent on imports, and the percentage that will be taxed, this leaves you with how much of that increase in income will be spent on consumption. Remember, the MPC plus the MPS plus the MPM plus the MRT must add up to 1. So let's have a numerical example. Assume there's been an increase in export revenue by $100. So there's an increase in an injection by $100. And assume in this economy the MPC is 0.5, the MPS is 0.1, MPM is 0.25, and the marginal rate of taxation is 0.15. Let's assume this $100 increase in export revenue goes to one person. The first person who gets this $100, because of the MPC being 0.5, they will spend $50, which is 0.5 of $100, save 0.1 of $100, which is $10. They will import products worth $25 because the MPM is 0.25, and they'll pay a tax to the government of $15. The second person who receives the first person's spending, which is that $50 that the first person spent, will then spend 0.5 of that, which is $25, save 0.1, which is $5, import products worth $12.5, and then pay a tax to the government of $7.5. The third person who receives that second person's spending of $25 will then spend $12.5, save $2.5, import products worth $6.25, and pay a tax to the government worth $3.75, and so on. You can see that consumption spending eventually will increase by more than that initial $100. As you can see, the injection multiplies, and the final effect on AD or GDP is much bigger than the original increase in the injection of $100 of extra revenue. So how do we calculate that final effect on aggregate demand or GDP? We use the multiplier, which is the next slide. So, the multiplier is equal to 1 divided by 1 minus the MPC. So, in this example, the MPC was 0.5. So, it's equal to 1 divided by 1 minus 0.5. Or, you could calculate it using another formula. 1 divided by the MPS plus the MRT plus the MPM. So, it's equal to 1 divided by 0.1 plus 0.25 plus 0.15 in this specific example. So, that's equal to 1 divided by 0.5, which gives us a multiplier of 2. What does this number mean? It means that that initial increase in the injection of an extra $100 in export revenue will lead to a final increase in GDP by this multiplier. You multiply this multiplier by the initial increase. So the final effect will be 2 times 100, which is $200. That means that because the multiplier is 2, any increase in injection will double, and that will be the effect, the final effect on aggregate demand or GDP. So what's the significance of this multiplier concept? Why is it even significant? Well, this concept or theory that injections multiply and can have an even larger impact on GDP or AD than the initial value of the injection is used by Keynesian economists to justify any increase in government spending in order to close a recessionary gap. Because ultimately, aggregate demand or GDP will increase by more than the initial value of the extra injection of government spending. And we can show that on a Keynesian AD-AS model. Okay? If AD is assumed to be the initial aggregate demand curve, with the initial increase in government spending, the curve will shift to the right initially to AD1, because that will be that initial injection of government spending. But over time, this will eventually increase in AD due to the multiplier effect. And this will then lead to another even bigger shift to AD2. So initially, the initial injection might only shift aggregate demand by a small amount, but over time it multiplies, and you'll see that there's an even bigger shift in the aggregate demand curve. And that's the multiplier effect. And Keynesian economists use this multiplier concept to justify why governments need to intervene to close recessionary or deflationary gaps, because any small amount of spending will end up multiplying in the economy. Now, the trick is, how do you actually estimate or calculate the multiplier and estimate it correctly and actually estimate that net effect on aggregate demand? That's the trick, and that's one of the limitations of this concept. So, the multiplier effect. If the government decides to fill a deflationary gap by increasing its own spending, the final increase in aggregate demand will actually be greater than the amount of government spending. In fact, any increase in aggregate demand will result in a proportionally larger increase in national income. And that's the whole main idea of the multiplier effect. Now, it's also important to remember that any change in any of the withdrawals from the circular flow will result in a change in the multiplier. So say, for example, if the taxation rate increases, the value of the multiplier will fall. As you can see, the multiplier is equal to 1 divided by MPS plus MRT plus MPM. So if the marginal rate of taxation increases and it rises, this means the denominator will increase, and therefore the value of the multiplier will fall. And another example, if, say, the marginal propensity to import falls, on the other hand, there will be an increase in the multiplier. So a change in any of the marginal propensities, if any of the marginal propensity to save, marginal rate of taxation, or MPM, if any of them rise, then the value of the multiplier will fall because there are more withdrawals or leakages from the circular flow. If the value of any of those marginal propensities to withdraw falls, then the multiplier will rise because there's less withdrawals or leakages from the circular flow. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. This concludes the end of my aggregate demand and aggregate supply series.